Good afternoon. Today's recording is going to be specifically about Prometheus and how we can use Prometheus to pull statistics, specifically metrics, from Big IP via telemetry streaming, and also how we can use Prometheus to monitor specific targets. Those are target APIs that are specifically running either within Kubernetes or outside of Kubernetes. So this discussion really is around capturing of big IP metrics via Prometheus using telemetry streaming as well as CIS. So Prometheus is an open source framework specifically for monitoring. And Prometheus has a lot of integration with backend applications such as Grafana, where you can actually store and actually build and customize some dashboards, etc. That specifically is outside of the scope of this call. However, I'm going to be doing some telemetry streaming with Grafana a little bit later in some up and coming recordings. So one thing that I wanted to do in this recording is specifically configure Prometheus in Kubernetes and configure Prometheus through a config map. A config map is a kind of deployment that enables us to configure the Prometheus YAML or Prometheus.yaml file. What I've also done is I want to load balance management traffic. So Prometheus has a UI. I want to load balance the management traffic with the Prometheus UI through the big IP. As you can see in the diagram right here, I have my big IP, and the big IP is front-ending this Prometheus UI, Prometheus dashboard. And so you'll connect to a virtual IP on the big IP, which is outside of the Kubernetes cluster, and big IP would then forward the traffic to Prometheus. And how this is configured, or how this works, is using something called container ingress services. So container ingress services is an ingress controller that lives in Kubernetes, monitors the API. CIS is configured through an ingress resource, and that ingress resource is going to allow big IP to connect to the Prometheus dashboard. And I've put all this configuration in this demo, and all of the links would be provided by the user guide that I'm gonna be creating. And so connect to the big IP, which would then connect to the Prometheus dashboard. This Prometheus dashboard is configured through the config map. The ingress allows, which when you create the ingress, it allows it allows for CIS to configure the big IP with both either, in this case, the pod as well as the Prometheus pods as well. So let's take a look at some of the items that are somewhat important. So Prometheus is configured using a namespace of monitor. You have a couple of things. We have the Prometheus cluster binding, or the cluster roles for the administration for Prometheus to run in Kubernetes. We also have the Prometheus YAML file. Those are just files that you can just pull down from Prometheus. So that's pretty much what you need there. The biggest key is for us to be able to connect to Prometheus via the big IP automated by CIS. Let's take a look at what that actually looks like. So you can see here in this environment, you can see in my environment here, I can go ahead and do Kubernetes get pod for all monitoring, and you can see there is my Prometheus instance. My Prometheus deployment is running. I provide links to the Prometheus configuration, or you can just pull it down from Prometheus exactly. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about next is the Prometheus service. And so let's go take a look at the service. And the service is actually really important. So Prometheus by default is actually listening on port 9090. That's the default port, but I want to connect to Prometheus. So what I've done is I've created this Prometheus service. This Prometheus service is basically going to expose an endpoint, and CIS is going to be able to detect this endpoint and therefore populate the IP address of this endpoint to big IP. So if we wanted to see that, we could actually do a kube kubectl describe the pod, and we can describe this pod right here. And there's actually a shorter way to do this, but we want you to do it this way, and it is of monitoring. And you'll notice right here, this IP address of the pod itself that Prometheus is running is 10.244.4.145. I am using Flannel as my CNI, so Big IP is connecting as part of an overlay, which is VXLAN, to this Kubernetes cluster. And so this is the IP address of the Prometheus deployment or Prometheus pod that's running. So this would be the IP address that would be exposed in the pool member on Big IP. And you can see that in a minute when I actually go down to my pool members. I'm going to change to my tenant. And I go down to my pool members, and you can see I have one Prometheus instance, and there we go, and it is exposed on port 9090, which is the port number that it's exposed on, and that's how we're able to connect to it. And the virtual that I've configured for this is my Prometheus virtual, which is my virtual server here, which is on 107, which I'm connecting on port 80. And so port 80 or port 443, it really doesn't matter. And we'll take a look at that in a second. And so this is really important, the creation of this Prometheus service by exposing and by using cluster IP and exposing that endpoint on port 80. That allows me to create this endpoint and be able to connect to this via Big IP using something called an Ingress service. And so that would be the next item that we would need to talk about. So this is the Ingress service. Now, if you notice, this API version is new. We're using a new API version here called networking.k8s.io.v1. This is the brand new API that's going to take effect in Kubernetes 1.22. I'd highly recommend that if you're using Ingress, you follow this format because there's quite a few changes. You'll also notice there was my virtual address that we are creating for this virtual server. So that would be the IP address that I would connect to. In my case, I'm actually using a DNS host called prometheus.f5demo.com, but that resolves to that virtual IP address. And you'll actually notice that I got some timer issue. I'm not a Prometheus administrator, so it's okay. But you can actually see here that it's kind of giving me some really cool information about what's hosted. So let's go and take a look back at our Ingress configuration. So I'm terminating TLS, which is really what I wanted to do. So I wanted to provide TLS on the front end and clear text on the back end. So I'm exposing HTTPS. So if I go to HTTP, hold on, Prometheus .f5 demo, we're going to get the redirect, and it's going to take us to the dashboard. And the targets is kind of what I think is really interesting here. So that kind of shows us how we are connecting. I need to remove this health because Prometheus is not really listening on port 8080 here. So I need to remove this health monitoring because it's actually not correct. I'll take it out. And you can actually see here that is the backend Prometheus service. So that's how I am exposing that service. And I'm connecting to that service on port 8080. So if you see there Prometheus service, that is how I am actually connecting to that Prometheus service right there. And this is the name of Prometheus service. So by creating these two and by using CIS, Big IP is going to be able to load balance the Prometheus management or the Prometheus UI. So that's great. The second item that I need to do is I need to configure the config map. And I want to configure the config map so I can actually see the target. And as you can see here, I have two endpoints. I have a big IP telemetry streaming or a big IP endpoint. I also have a CIS endpoint. You can change these names if you want, but you will notice here that CIS is running on 10.244.103. I don't pull that address. That address is pulled through the config map. You can see here's my big IP. You'll notice that my state is up. It tells me when it was last scraped, and this is a configuration in Prometheus. The pull in, you can change these pull interviews. You can talk about how often do you want to pulls, and of course there's no errors here. What's really nice about this is that now these components, I know that the API is up, and therefore if the API is up, we're able to service these components. So this is actually kind of nice. You can push the status to a dashboard if you want. Prometheus has a lot of different items that you can monitor. There's a lot of metrics that we can pull, specifically on the big IP. And so how do we pull these metrics? I was going to talk a little bit about that next. And there's a lot to cover in this video. So I want to talk a little bit about how to pull the metrics. So we're gonna pull the metrics using something called telemetry streaming. If you haven't used telemetry streaming, or if you're not familiar with telemetry streaming is a extension that runs on big IP. And so telemetry streaming creates this puller endpoint that Prometheus is going to pull. And so all that you really need to do is install telemetry streaming as an RPM and then execute this telemetry streaming configuration to the telemetry streaming endpoint, telemetry streaming API, and then you will be able to connect to telemetry streaming via Prometheus. And so let me show you where the telemetry streaming RPM is installed. So if you go to iApps, you go to package management, here it is right here. So I've installed this telemetry streaming endpoint, this telemetry streaming RPM. And so now I'm able to connect to this telemetry streaming RPM and pull specific metrics. And that's what Prometheus is doing. And so Prometheus is aware of this specific telemetry streaming API through the config map. And so if we take a look at the config map, you can see this is the configuration of how we configure Prometheus. And inside this configuration, I have these job names. The first job name is called Big IPTS. This is the scrape timeouts. We're using HTTPS. But that right there is what's really important. That's the metric path. So Prometheus is pulling this metric path up. There's my username and password. You would take this out. You would actually use some type of secret here. You can use Kubernetes secrets. I'm not. I'm just a PME, so I just exposed my passwords there. But you can clear that. It's an internal device in any case here, as you can see. I'm just running in my laptop. So you would put the secret. You would put some secrets in here as part of this config map. And if you go look on the Prometheus site, you will find out how to get that information there. What we also have is we have a job name for CIS. And so this is what I'm doing is I'm pulling some of the metrics for CIS. And this is the information that is created in CIS, specifically on the target page. So if we go back to the target page right here, you can see all of this information was created by that job called CIS. You can see job is called CIS. This is the scheme. There's the metrics. It gives me some of the labels. It tells me my pod IP. It tells me a couple of other information about my host, etc., etc., and kind of where it's getting some information from. So this is quite nice because it actually gives me quite a bit of information. That is just on the what we call the targets. These are targets. These are target endpoints that we've configured. So for example, here's a target endpoint for big IP. You can expand this, right? If you're very familiar with Prometheus, you can expand these endpoints and what you see by using these labels. There's quite a lot that you can add here. But what's really cool here is within the Prometheus dashboard, we have something called, we have these items that we can actually search for. So if you look here, what I'm graphing actually right here is all of the big IP monitored services via CIS. And you can see some of these monitored services here. Here's an instance that's called job Kubernetes pods. And this is a default, and this is actually for the Ingress. So if I actually go up and take a look, it actually tells me, gives me some information on actually what I was monitoring. Here we go. This is one that's recent of as this afternoon, and you can see I'm monitoring one service. This is really cool because you can use this to determine what CIS is monitoring. So CIS, the name of CIS is the application of K8s Big IP controller. It tells me the instance, it tells me the job, and it says right here that this is monitoring a specific Kubernetes deployment, and this status of this deployment is of success. And so this is just one, but there are a couple of other different ones here. And so this actual specific one here is of 103. And so I think that this is a default. If we go look in Kubernetes here, if we say kube ctl get pod, and this is the default namespace, we can see these are the 4 instances that are running. And I believe that these are the instances right here. There's 4 of these instances right here. So you can actually pull that. There's a couple of other things that you can pull. If you actually go down and actually look here, you can actually see these are, I can say what are the big IP nodes, and run and execute. There's some nodes right here. So you can see I'm monitoring the app and I'm monitoring this instance. So this is a job. This is also CIS again. And so this is pulling some information right here. So if I wanted to actually take a look at the big IP, I can actually do F5 and you can actually monitor. This is actually pulling telemetry streaming now. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling the statistics on the big IP. So you can actually pull any of these specific labels. And so here's one that I want to pull. Let's take a look at potential. How about client connections? This is a gauge, and we can go graph this. You can see there's not that much going on in my system. I do apologize, but there's a couple of virtual servers here. As you can see, this is the instance for virtual server 107. These are for the management of the Prometheus UI. Here's one right here that this is for an application. This is a very simple application. I have a pod there. So if I go ahead and just generate some quick traffic, there's some traffic here that I can generate. If I have a traffic generator or a lot of traffic, then you're obviously going to get better statistics. But if I go ahead and execute this, you can see that there was a couple of connections there. Very, very simple, but it's Prometheus monitoring. Yeah, this is a kind of interesting error. It's basically saying that my Prometheus server and my browser is out of sync, and it's kind of a pain. I'm not a Prometheus admin. I did try and troubleshoot. I did a bit of research. I believe it's probably coming from the hypervisor, but your Prometheus administrator or your login administrator will be able to, specifically if you're using production, then you're going to pull stuff from NTP, so your times are going to be synchronized, so you won't get that. But that is actually really, really, really cool. And so as you can see, I'm pulling all this data via Prometheus from the big IP using telemetry streaming. And so I really like this. I think this is great. So I've given you folks some stuff to work with. Honestly, I've had to gather this information from a few deployments from other customers, and also work with it and do some experimenting, so that I can give you some ideas on kind of somewhere to start. And that's the purpose of this document, is to really provide a quick start and allow you to play with this a little bit, and then maybe contribute back. I'm really interested to find out if you can pull or find out more statistics, or if you're able to contribute back. I'd love to find out a little bit more about what you find out specifically. Maybe if you have someone that's very knowledgeable on Prometheus, what they're able to do just with expanding my job names. That would be cool. So I want to thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed this video of big IP metrics from Prometheus using telemetry streaming. Thank you so much.